When my jaw wasn't dropped, my face was often like scrunched up with disgust, or my eyes would be wide, like thinking, surely this isn't what's about to happen. There's no way that oh, it's much grosser and weirder than I could have expected. Okay, sure. Yeah. Like, wow. Welcome, friends. It's Jay from Damn Fine TV here with another solo mini review, this time for The Substance. As usual, I'm going to be as non-spoilery as possible up top, and then I'm going to dive a little deeper into some plot and specifics later on. But don't worry, I will give you a warning in the video as well as in the description for the video, so you will be plenty warned and plenty prepared. And hey, if you're new here, maybe you'd like to subscribe for more reviews of horror films. It'll change your life. Okay, I can't guarantee that, but it was too cute of a tie-in with the film. A film that I can't guarantee you're gonna like, and I guess I could say that about any of the films that we review here at Damn Fine TV, but from what I've seen so far, this one seems to be particularly divisive. Personally, I'm really glad I got the opportunity to see it in theaters on a big screen. I think there's a lot of aspects that just aren't going to play the same or like hit quite the same on a smaller screen. This is a body horror that is turned all the way up. It's visceral and viscera and in your face about a lot of its elements. It really utilizes the space that it knows it's going to be able to fill on the large screen format. And I think if you're into body horror and gore and you want to feel that gross discomfort on a big scale like that, absolutely go see it in theaters. If you're a bit squeamish, you might want to wait and, view this one at home, maybe even with somebody else that's a little less squeamish who can tell you when the worst parts are over. Now, just a quick basic premise for those completely unaware. This movie is basically about what if there was a substance that could create an enhanced version of yourself. And so basically what the film is doing is just putting a very sci-fi twist on the beauty industry and kind of takes it to this really exaggerated but also not totally unbelievable place. So, sci-fi. And I think because of the content and eventually in an effort to subvert this, the film does play a lot with the concept of the male gaze, which I did honestly find challenging at times, just in terms of navigating my own feelings around body image insecurity that the film was really surfacing, sort of triggering for me. And honestly, I do think it's hard to say whether or not this film would be harmful or helpful to somebody who is, at the current moment, like really in the thick of dealing with those insecurities and who is maybe feeling a lot of pressure around beauty standards. At the end of the day, I think that what the film is trying to say about beauty standards and aging and all of these like mainstream expectations, especially those placed on women and femme presenting folks, I think it is a really important thing that it's trying to say. I think it has a good message, unfortunately, a still very necessary and relevant message. I do think that by the end of the film, you understand where the filmmaker is coming from and what she's trying to say. But I do think that watching could be challenging for some people. Like if you've dealt with unrealistic and outrageous beauty standards being placed upon you, it could be a little triggering, though hopefully cathartic. That was certainly my experience. And I do kind of wonder if some of the nuance of this film will be somewhat lost on folks who don't necessarily have to deal with this kind of stuff firsthand, because I think there were certain aspects of the film that I just sort of understood, that just sort of resonated because of the gender that I was raised as and the sort of societal gaze and expectation that came along with that. Overall, I really enjoyed the story. I was fascinated by the kind of like mechanics of it all, the like the core concept and the sort of intricacies of how it all worked, like the actual product, the actual thing in the movie, how it all worked. I guess like this advanced science, maybe you could call it. The vision that the filmmaker had, it was just the way that she was able to translate it was really, really captivating. And also absolutely bonkers. And for me, that's a good thing. For some people, maybe that's not a great thing, but this was bonkers. Like truly the term jaw-dropping has never been so apt and actually applicable because I actually had my jaw physically drop during, I'd say, a handful of moments. And that's a lot for a jaw to physically drop on its own. And this has not happened to me since I watched David Lynch's Eraserhead, which is bonkers and batshit in its own special way. Now, I do wonder, like, maybe people who watch more body horror than I typically do won't be as like wide-eyed as I was during certain scenes. But for me, again, the vision, the imagination of this filmmaker, who I should say her name is Coralie Fargiat, I believe you pronounce it. She also made the film Revenge, if you've seen that. Anyways, her vision, her imagination in terms of what the human body could do or what it could become when given a substance was wild and stunning and jaw-dropping for me. And that final sequence was especially twisted. It was funny, it was sad, it was bizarre, it was truly unlike anything I've ever seen before. At one point, I just was laughing because what was unfolding before my eyes was so absurd and jarring for me in a really good way. But it was like I just needed to release all of the emotions. And maybe that was the catharsis too that I was feeling. And it just had to come out in some way. And laughter was the way it manifested. I really loved looking at this film. I know that's a funny thing to say, but like it was a treat for the eyes, which I feel like has been the case for a lot of films in 2024. But this one, I mean, like the gore, the gross nature of it all, was presented in what I think is a really unique way. The camera angles at certain points were what I can only describe as obnoxious and overbearing, and for really good reason. They conveyed so much through that specific choice. When my jaw wasn't dropped, my face was often like scrunched up with disgust, or my eyes would be wide, like thinking, surely this isn't what's about to happen. There's no way that oh, it's much grosser and weirder than I could have expected. Okay, sure. Yeah. Like, wow. There were aspects of this film that made me really queasy in the beginning. I have heard stories about like people who had to walk out because they felt so queasy. I know Demi Moore was telling people like don't eat before this film. I don't think it got that far for me, but I'm not usually overly squeamish. But again, there was like these queasy feelings at the beginning of the film, such as from the camera angles, right? But then other stuff as well that I don't want to get spoilery about. But by the end, or like by midway through, a little over midway through, I realized like, oh, I'm really used to this now. It felt very normal and it felt almost like I was numb to it in a way. And I do feel like that was kind of part of the point because so many of us we can become really numb to the toxicity around beauty standards and expectations because it's just so much a part of the culture. It's just so much a part of everyday life. It permeates into everything we do and look at for some people. And I think part of the horror for me was realizing, like, oh, that's not bothering me the way it did about an hour ago. Why is that? What's happening there? Is it because the film has escalated about 6 times since then? Yes, absolutely. But it's also this like repetition of things, this like, again, permeation of things when you start just feeling like, right, that's just how things are. Now, I'm still trying to figure out how to properly vocalize this next feeling, but something that I really enjoyed about the film was this duality in depicting the human body. Mostly female bodies, in maybe one instance, a male body, but just this like juxtaposing of the beautiful and sexy things that a body can do and like the disgusting and sickening things that a body could be put through to achieve a certain result, but also just like the contrast between what's pleasing and what's repulsing, and taking both of those things to extremes, because after a while the beautiful parts, the sexy parts became ugly. Like it was too perfect, it was too glossy, it was too much. And I just really loved that interplay, that duality, seeing the full spectrum of how absolutely pleasing a body can look and how absolutely repulsive it can look. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley were really fucking good. Now, given the context of the story here and the fact that a woman was at the helm, you gotta hope they both felt very safe and supported while filming this, because so many of the scenes were so vulnerable, so vulnerable. Like there is a lot of nudity. There are a lot of shots where the camera is up close and personal. It's raw, it's exposing. And I also think there's this other layer of acting that goes into a role where there's going to be a lot of practical effects, prosthetics, and makeup. And obviously, huge credit to the effects teams, the makeup teams. Like, they created some truly unforgettable stuff for this film. Final act, I am looking at and applauding for you. Wow. I'm actually going to link to an article I read that was about some of the special effects and prosthetics in the film. It's a really interesting read, but don't go there unless you've seen the full movie. But yeah, there's just some moments where these practical effects and prosthetics just leave you feeling stunned, and you realize like there's humans inside of those and they are acting their butts off. Okay, I think that's it for non-spoilery stuff. So if you're heading out now, thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next one. Anyone coming along for the ride, we are going there in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To stay on the topic of performances, Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, they both had a really big task in front of them here. I mean, they really are the film in many ways. You know, it's like it's them and it's all these effects. The rest of the cast, I feel, is mostly in the peripheries. Dennis Quaid certainly does have more screen time, but to me, I got the vibe that like his character and everyone else kind of just combined and coalesced to become this symbol of society and toxicity. And it's almost like Dennis Quaid is just the face and the voice of this like one big hive mind almost. And in that way, a lot of the film felt really isolated. Like, even as Sue was becoming more famous, and like a bigger figure in the world, the story really just was about this one woman. Now, when I first left the theater, I did feel sort of unsatisfied with the lack of character development, specifically for Elizabeth. And I still think that the film could have done with just a few more story beats here and there that were related to her character, just to give her a little more nuance. I mean, we don't really get a lot from Sue either, but her character being more of a shell, I think makes sense overall. The biggest part of me for any story is my relationship with a character. I need someone to love or someone to hate. I mean, someone to feel a little bit of depth with. And I don't think that was offered with Elizabeth. And I mean, she's the whole reason we go down this wild and twisted path. So I do feel like we should care about her. And the kind of the one time that I really felt that deeper connection was when she didn't go out on the date with the guy from high school or grade school or whatever it was. The breakdown that she had, the insecurity that she was portraying was definitely palpable. And I think in that moment, I was so excited for her to have some sort of like human connection to like get outside of herself. And it felt really sad to me when that dissolved. And I mean, if you've ever had that experience of like nothing's fitting in the way you want it to, your hair doesn't like fall the way you want it, you're not feeling that confidence to step outside the door and be in a social situation, that scene is going to hit for you because it hit for me. And that was something that I was able to connect with Elizabeth over. There was a lot of stuff I was able to infer. It's like I said before, I mean, I was raised in a certain way. So there are just certain parts of the story that will immediately resonate with me, having lived, not that experience, but certainly having similar experiences. But I think I would absolutely trade a few shots of Sue's ass for some more emotional beats with Elizabeth, not to throw shade at Margaret Qualley's ass. Or potentially prosthetics. I think the boobs were prosthetics. I'm not sure. Either way, I mean, she looked good, but I would have loved to get to know Elizabeth just a little bit more. Because I think overall, the real connection that I had was with the story itself, was with the themes that it was presenting. Again, because of that personal experience that I'm going to bring to the viewing. But I wish I had felt something more with Elizabeth. I feel like we don't really get a chance to know her at all, which is wild because this film is 2 hours and 20 minutes, which means there should have been enough time for all of this. And honestly, anybody worried about that runtime, I don't know if you had the same experience as me. I was so worried I was going to have to get up and go pee and miss some of it, but it wasn't even a thing. Like it just went by. It was not a thing. But yeah, I also kind of feel like we could have had something more from the inciting incident of it all. Like I didn't necessarily feel the sadness or the desperation that Elizabeth was so clearly going through because it drove her to use the substance. Also, like she had no friends, no family, no romantic relationships. The lack of connection, while potentially purposeful, did feel a little strange. Ultimately, I was left a little hollow in terms of what this film had to offer character-wise. I just don't feel like anybody was super distinct. However, the more I think about this aspect of the film, the less it bothers me because I can also see how perhaps this was the point. It's like maybe Elizabeth and Sue were also meant to be a kind of a symbol, a stand-in for the people who are most victimized by toxic beauty standards and ageism and sexism. Because, like, the points and the message of the story still very much came across, still very much made an impact. Something I continue to think about is how the story does a really great job at conveying how women are pitted against each other, which is shown through Elizabeth and Sue so quickly becoming antagonistic towards each other. And then B, the deeper layer of all of that, which is how we wind up being pit against ourselves. Because remember, there is no she. There is only you. You are one. And that final showdown between Sue and this completely disfigured form of Elizabeth is equally the most violent and intense part of the film, as well as the saddest and most devastating. It really made me reflect on the amount of damaging behaviors, negative self-talk, and self-harm, really, that we can fall into before we realize the extent of the damage we've done and the person that we've hurt most, which is ourselves. So while I might not feel as much of an emotional investment with the characters, I certainly feel this very cerebral, very resonant connection to the overall story. And I guess I do feel a kind of a sadness for the monster Eliza Sue. But again, it's kind of in that more bigger picture kind of way than like specifically for her. Like it's more about what she represents, this like end result of the way that we as a society, as a culture, not necessarily you and I, but we, all of us, the way that we will alter and change and transform ourselves to become something that is ultimately so unrecognizable. And the way the crowd is terrified and disgusted by her, and yet I'm sitting here thinking, this is a monster of your own making. Like, you craved this woman's youth and beauty and sex and perfection. You were feeding off of her, and she certainly gave you a feast with those buckets of blood. I've truly never seen so much blood in such a short amount of time. It was spectacular. I was dazzled. Truly. And I suppose on that bizarre note of being dazzled by a room full of people being sprayed head to toe by what is essentially a fire hose full of blood, I think I have reached my final form and it is time for me to dissolve into the ground and bid you adieu. I would love to hear from you guys though. What did you think of the substance? Was it batshit enough for you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be right back.